Her own father signed her name on a document and sold her for £60. She found out from a stranger holding the paper. But the man who received her? He did something nobody expected.
The morning Mira turned 23, her father sold her for £60 and a debt he never told her about. She found out the way most unbearable things are discovered, not with a conversation, not with a warning, but with a stranger standing in the doorway of her home, holding a folded document that had her name written at the top in ink that was already dry. The deal was done before she ever walked into the room. Her father, Edmund Voss, was a man who smelled of pipe smoke and old leather and the particular sourness of a person who had given up on himself a long time ago. He sat in his chair by the window, the way he always did, but he wouldn't look at her. That was the first sign something was wrong. Edmund Voss always looked at people when he wanted something from them. When he couldn't meet your eyes, and it meant he had already taken it. The stranger's name was Percival Crane. He was a solicitor, thin-shouldered, polite in the way that expensive men are polite when they are delivering terrible news and want to be thanked for the delivery. He handed Mira the document. She read her name. She read the word arrangement. She read the phrase, in accordance with the settlement of debts accrued. She put the paper down on the table very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to notice. What debts? She said. Not a question, a statement, because she already knew, somewhere deep and cold in her chest, that the answer was going to be about her, that it had always been about her. Edmund finally looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, or the kind of red that comes from a man who has been crying alone and is embarrassed by it, but not embarrassed enough to have made a different choice. It was the physician, he said. 3 years of physicians, your mother's funeral, the house on Grayfield Lane. It adds up, Mira. You don't understand how fast it adds up. She understood perfectly. Her mother, Cecile Voss, had died 4 years earlier from a fever that moved fast and left nothing behind except a house that smelled like lavender water, and a grief that Edmund Voss had apparently decided to manage through borrowing money he didn't have from men who charged interest he couldn't pay. And Mira, who had been the one to sit beside her mother's bed every night for 6 weeks, who had wrung out the cool cloths and read aloud from the Psalms until her voice gave out, but who had buried her with 16 shillings she'd saved from her own wages. Mira was now the settlement. The reason, Crane explained in his soft professional voice, was that Mira had been examined by a physician 2 years prior, during a brief and disastrous engagement to a merchant's son named Herbert Fallow. The engagement had ended when the physician reported that Mira showed signs consistent with barrenness. Herbert Fallow had walked out of her life within the week, as if infertility were something she had done to him personally. The report had followed her since then, the way rumors follow women, quietly, efficiently, and everywhere. This made her, Crane said, difficult to place through conventional means. So Edmund Voss had found unconventional ones. She was to be delivered to the household of a man named Gideon Hartwell, who held the title of Duke of Crestmore, and who had, apparently, agreed to take her as a companion to his elderly mother, who was unwell and requiring attendance. The £60 would clear Edmund's smallest debt. There were arrangements in place for the rest. Mira stood in that room for a long moment after Crane finished speaking. She could hear the rain outside, the way it hit the street in sheets, the sound of a cart horse somewhere past the window, hooves on wet stone, slow and tired. She looked at her father. She thought about saying something that would wound him. She had the words ready. She had been carrying them for years. She didn't use them. She picked up the paper, folded it once along its original crease, and walked out of the room to pack her things. She had 2 dresses, 1 pair of boots with a repaired heel, or a hairbrush with a cracked handle, and a small tin box her mother had left her. Inside the tin box was a lock of dark hair, tied with a piece of blue ribbon, a button from a coat Mira couldn't remember anymore, and a folded note in her mother's handwriting that said simply, "You were the best thing." Mira had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. She put the tin box in the center of her bag and packed everything else around it. The carriage came at 9:30. She did not say goodbye to her father. He did not come to the door. The road to Crestmore Hall took 4 hours through November countryside that had gone gray and skeletal, the trees stripped bare, the fields flat and waterlogged, the sky the color of old pewter. But Mira sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched it all go past and tried very hard not to think about what she was riding toward, because every time she let herself think about it, her chest did something that was not quite panic and not quite grief, but lived exactly in the uncomfortable space between them. She knew nothing about Gideon Hartwell except what Crane had told her in 3 sentences. Duke of Crestmore. Mother unwell. Companion required. She had heard his name once before, 2 years ago at a dinner she hadn't wanted to attend, when a woman across the table had mentioned him in a lowered voice and then changed the subject when she noticed Mira listening. That was the kind of reputation that lived in lowered voices and changed subjects, and Mira had spent the last 4 hours trying to decide if that frightened her or not. Oh, she decided it did. She allowed herself that honesty, at least. Crestmore Hall appeared through the carriage window just as the light was starting to fail. That particular dim hour, when everything looks like a painting of itself rather than the real thing. It was enormous in the way that old houses are enormous, not boastful, but absolute. The kind of size that says, "This has been here longer than you, and will be here after you are gone." The stone was dark from the rain. Every window on the upper floors was dark. One window on the ground floor, far to the left, had a light in it, warm and amber, and Mira found herself looking at it the way you look at the one candle left burning in a church after all the others have gone out. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door and offered his hand, and Mira stepped down onto wet gravel that crunched under her repaired boot and smelled of clay and dead leaves, and something faintly wood smoke sweet from a chimney she couldn't see. She stood there with her bag and looked up at the house. And then the front door opened, and the man in the doorway was not a butler. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28, perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that was set in the particular way of someone who is holding tension they have decided not to speak aloud. He wore no jacket. His shirt was loose at the collar. He looked like a man who had been interrupted in the middle of something private and had come to the door anyway, which she would later learn was exactly what had happened. While he looked at her for a moment without speaking. Not the way men usually looked at her, cataloging and assessing. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you are surprised that they are real. "You're Mira Voss," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for another second. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd actually come." And something in his voice, not pity, not relief, but something softer and more complicated than either, made her grip the handle of her bag a little tighter. "I didn't have much choice," she said. "No," he said. "Neither did I." And he stepped back from the door to let her in out of the rain. The inside of Crestmore Hall smelled like beeswax candles and something older underneath. Stone that had absorbed 200 years of winters and was no longer willing to give the warmth back easily. Mira followed Gideon Hartwell through a corridor that was wider than her entire bedroom at home, her boot heels quiet on the stone floor, her wet coat dripping a trail behind her that she felt embarrassed about and couldn't stop. He walked ahead of her without looking back, which she was grateful for. because it meant she could look at him without being caught doing it. His shoulders were tense in the way of someone carrying something invisible. His left hand, she noticed, was wrapped at the knuckles with a strip of linen cloth, the kind of wrapping you do yourself in a hurry when there is no one to do it for you. She did not ask about it, but she filed it away the way she filed most things, quietly, in a place she could return to later. He stopped at a door near the end of the corridor and pushed it open. It was a sitting room, modest by the standards of the rest of the house, a fireplace with a proper fire going, 2 chairs, a small table with a tea tray that had gone cold. The fire was the best thing she had seen all day. She walked toward it without thinking, pulled off her wet gloves, and held her hands out to it, and for a moment she forgot entirely that a stranger was watching her. "Sit," Gideon said. Not unkindly, just directly, the way people speak when they have stopped caring about the performance of politeness and moved into something more honest. She sat. He poured her tea from the cold pot, which struck her as a strange thing for a duke to do. And then he sat in the chair across from her and looked at her with those dark, interrupted eyes and said, "I need to tell you something before my housekeeper does, because she will make it sound worse than it is." Mira wrapped both hands around the cold teacup. "All right," she said. "My mother is not unwell," he said. "My mother died in September." The room was very quiet except for the fire. Mira looked at him. He looked back at her steadily, like a man who has practiced saying a difficult thing until it no longer breaks him to say it, but hasn't quite gotten there yet. "I see," she said carefully. "The arrangement with your father was made in August, when she was still alive, and the physician thought she had more time than she did." He paused. He looked at his wrapped hand briefly, then back at her. "She wanted someone with her, but she'd asked me to find someone. I found you, or rather, Crane found you, and then she died before you arrived, and I should have sent word to cancel the arrangement, and I didn't. And I have been trying to decide for 6 weeks how to explain that without sounding like a man who purchased a person out of indecision." Mira put the teacup down. "Is that what you did?" "I don't know what I did," he said, with a bluntness that surprised her. "I know I didn't cancel it. I know I told myself there were practical reasons. I know the practical reasons were not the real ones." She sat with that for a moment. The fire popped and sent up a small cascade of sparks. Outside, the rain had gotten heavier, and she could hear it against the window glass now, insistent and close. "What were the real ones?" she said. Again, not a question. Yet he was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My mother used to say that this house had too much silence in it. After she died, I understood what she meant. Silence in an empty house isn't quiet. It's loud in a way that's very hard to explain to someone who hasn't heard it." Mira thought about her mother's room after the fever. She thought about walking past the closed door for 3 months before she could make herself open it. She thought about the specific, terrible loudness of a room that used to hold a person and doesn't anymore. "I've heard it," she said. Something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a door shifts when someone on the other side puts their hand against it. He told her the rest over the next hour, in pieces. Well, the way people tell things when they haven't planned to tell them and are surprising themselves by doing it. His mother, Dorothea Hartwell, had been the kind of woman who held a household together through sheer force of attention. She remembered every servant's birthday. She knew which floorboards creaked. She had strong opinions about the correct way to arrange flowers in November. She had been sick for 8 months. And for 8 months, Gideon had run the estate and managed the tenants and answered the letters and done everything that needed doing. And he had visited her room every morning and every evening. And she had died on a Tuesday at 4 in the morning while he was downstairs at his desk, because he had fallen asleep over a ledger and hadn't heard her bell. He said that last part looking at the fire, not at Mira. But she didn't say she was sorry. She had heard enough empty sorries in her own grief to know they landed like stones in still water. They made a sound, and then they sank, and the water closed over them, and nothing changed. Instead, she said, "She knew you were there. People know." He looked at her then. "You can't know that." "No," she said, "but I needed to believe it once, and it helped, so I'm telling it to you, and you can decide what to do with it." He studied her face for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Then he said, "Crane told me about the physician's report." Her jaw tightened. There it was. She had been waiting for it since the carriage, the way you wait for a bruise to be pressed. "He had no business telling you that," she said. "No, he didn't." His voice was flat and certain. "I want you to know that it has no bearing on anything in this house. I'm telling you, because I think you've been carrying the awareness of it like a wound, waiting for people to poke at it. And I would rather you know from the start that I'm not going to." Mira looked at him for a long time. She was not a woman who cried easily. She had learned to keep that private, the way you keep anything precious private when the world has shown you it will use precious things against you. But something in her throat tightened in a way she had to breathe carefully through. "Why did you bring me here?" she said. "The real reason. Not the silence, not your mother. The real one." He looked at his wrapped hand. He turned it over once, then looked back at her. "Because Crane told me what your father did," he said. "And I couldn't leave you there." The fire burned between them. The rain pressed against the glass. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck 8, and the sound of it moved through the walls and faded, and Mira Voss sat in a chair in a dead woman's house and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that someone had seen her. Not her usefulness, not her failure, not the physician's report, or her father's debt. Just her. It was the most frightening thing that had happened to her all day. She did not sleep well that first night. The bed was too soft, after years of the thin mattress at her father's house, and the silence of Crestmore Hall was the kind that pressed against your ears, deep and total, interrupted only by the wind finding the gaps in the old window frames and the occasional groan of the house settling into itself the way old things do when the temperature drops. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Gideon had said. "Because Crane told me what your father did, and I couldn't leave you there." She turned the words over the way you turn something fragile over in your hands, checking for cracks, looking for the place where it stopped being true. She was good at that. Years of disappointment had made her good at finding the hollow center of a kind thing. But the words stayed solid. That frightened her more than anything. She was up before the house stirred, dressed by the gray early light, and she went downstairs, because she didn't know what else to do with herself, and sitting in a room waiting had never suited her. She found the kitchen by following the smell of wood smoke, and found the cook, a stout woman named Bess, who looked at her with open curiosity, and then handed her a cup of tea without being asked, which Mira took as a good sign about the character of the household. She helped Bess with the morning bread without being invited to, not because she felt she had to earn her place, but because her hands needed something to do, and the rhythm of it, the press and fold of the dough, the flour soft against her palms, at the warmth rising from the oven, settled something in her chest that had been unsettled since the carriage ride. Bess watched her for a few minutes, and then started talking. The comfortable way that women who have worked alone for a long time talk when they finally have someone to talk to. She told Mira about the house, about Dorothea Hartwell, who had come into this kitchen every Sunday morning without fail, and sat at this exact table, and eaten her bread warm from the oven, because she said it was the best moment of the week. about how the house had changed in the months since September, about how Gideon had stopped eating regular meals and started sleeping in his study, and how the staff worried about him in the quiet way of people who are loyal and helpless at the same time. Mira listened to all of it. She said very little. She filed it away. She saw Gideon at breakfast, and then again in the late morning when she was in the library looking at the shelves trying to find something to read, and she pulled a book out, and a folded piece of paper fell from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. She picked it up without thinking. It was a list, written in a woman's handwriting. Neat, deliberate. The handwriting of someone who took small things seriously. It was a list of books, 20 or 30 titles, numbered, with small notes beside some of them. Beside number 7, someone had written, "Gideon cried at the ending. He will deny this." Mira was still holding it when she heard him behind her. She turned. He was standing in the doorway with that same expression he seemed to carry everywhere, the one that was working very hard to stay composed. But his eyes went to the paper in her hand, and something moved across his face, quick and unguarded, the way pain moves when it catches you off guard. "That's my mother's," he said. "I know," Mira said. "It fell out." She held it toward him. He crossed the room and took it, and for a moment their fingers were both on the paper at the same time, and neither of them moved, and the library was very quiet. He took the paper. He looked at it for a moment. Then, without planning to, he sat down on the floor, right there between the shelves, his back against the bookcase, like a man whose legs had simply decided they were done. Mira looked at him for a second, and then she sat down on the floor across from him, because it seemed like the right thing, and she had long since stopped worrying about whether things were proper when they were necessary. And he told her about his mother then. Not the facts of her life or her death, but the actual her. The way she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. The way she argued with the gardener every spring about the roses, and was always wrong and never admitted it. The way she used to put her hand on the back of his neck when he was troubled. Just briefly. Just once. And somehow it was always enough. He talked for a long time. Mira listened the whole way through, and when he finally stopped, she said, "She sounds like someone worth missing." "She was," he said. "Then miss her," Mira said gently. "You don't have to be finished with it yet." He looked at her then in a way that made her chest do something complicated. Not gratitude, or not only gratitude. Something more searching than that. The weeks that followed were quiet, and then gradually less quiet. Mira settled into the house the way water settles into a space, finding the shape of it, filling the gaps. She organized Dorothea's books the way the list suggested. She learned which floorboards creaked. She had long breakfasts with Bess, and long evenings in the sitting room with the fire going. And more often than not, Gideon was there too. At first because he was passing through, and then because he was staying. And they talked about books, and about the tenants, and about the particular stubbornness of the rose garden. And somewhere in all of it, the careful distance between two people who have been hurt by the world began, very slowly, to close. One evening in late December, when the frost had come, and the grounds were silver with it, Gideon found her standing at the window in the library, looking out at the moonlight on the frozen grass. He came and stood beside her. They stood there together for a while without speaking, which by then was a comfortable thing, rather than an uncertain one. "I owe you something," he said. "You don't," she said. "An honest thing, then." He turned toward her. His face in the moonlight was open in a way she had watched him work toward for weeks, the careful composure coming down piece by piece, like stones removed from a wall. "I am not the same as I was before September. I don't know if I'll be easy to be near, long term. I don't know how to promise things when I've learned how fast things go." Mira turned to look at him. She thought about her mother's tin box. The note with the soft folds. You were the best thing. She thought about what it meant to love someone knowing you couldn't keep them. She thought about how her mother had loved anyway, fully, without insurance against loss, and what that had cost her, and what it had given her, and how in the end, the giving had been larger than the cost. Nobody is easy to be near, long term, she said. That's not what it's about. What is it about? He said quietly. She looked at him steadily. Deciding to stay anyway. He reached out and took her hand, slowly, carefully, the way you reach for something you are afraid of dropping. His fingers were warm against hers. She felt the slight roughness of his healed knuckles. She did not pull away. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as a companion, not as an arrangement. I want you to stay because this house is better with you in it. And so am I. Arden, I know it's too soon, and I know everything that brought you here was wrong, and I'm sorry for all of it. But I think you already know what I'm saying. She did know. She had known for weeks, in the careful way that you know something you are not yet ready to say out loud. I'm not easy to be near either, she said. I know, he said. I've noticed. I don't mind. She laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, the ease of it, the way it moved through her like something unlocking. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed, without deciding to first. He smiled at the sound of it, a real smile, the kind that reached all the way up, and she thought, this is it. This is the thing her mother's note was talking about. Not the absence of hard things, yet but the presence of a person who makes the hard things smaller just by being beside you in them. Outside the frost-covered grounds of Crestmore Hall lay still and silver under a full winter moon. And inside, in a library that smelled of old paper and wood smoke, Mira Voss held the hand of a man who had found her at the lowest point of her life and chosen her not for what she could give him, but simply because she deserved to be chosen. She held on. She stayed.